The conference has been a magnificent success for one simple reason, and that is that our intention was to achieve two things. The first was to get a recognition that infrastructure is not about individual assets, it's about the system of infrastructure. That's the way the water system connects to the transport system, to the energy system and so forth. And there's been an overwhelming recognition of the importance of that from both policymakers, from the academic community, and in particular from business. So I think that's an achievement in itself, and that there is a real sense of energy and purpose that we've got to bring about the right data, the right conceptual tools and frameworks, so that when we think about a new road or a hospital, that it connects to all the other infrastructure services that are needed in order to provide a seamless value proposition to the customer. And that's very much a segue to the other factor that we were trying to, if you like, inject into the conversation about infrastructure, and that's about people. That there's been a very clear and deliberate and warm embrace of the notion that infrastructure is not about the reinforced concrete, the steel. It's about the way people aspire to live, the way people want a better life, and how do we design infrastructure to meet those sorts of aspirations and those sorts of expectations. And that's a very different formula to thinking about infrastructure. Rather than just build it and they will come, we're saying, well, how do we be sensitive to the single mother, to the aged person, to the professional, and everyone else that fits into that spectrum? And that's really a great challenge, but it's also a very worthy one, because that's the way you and I and everyone else has an expectation. We require something different from the infrastructure system. And as Australia and other countries around this world age and change, that our infrastructure must change with us. And how we can do that in a measured, front-footed way, I think is really quite fundamental to the discussion here today. So there's been a great, if you like, celebration from my point of view, and an embrace that the Smart Infrastructure Facility has been arguing since its inception about two things. That it's about the infrastructure system and the way things connect, and we must look after that. We must be a custodian of it, and we must design for an interconnected infrastructure system. But also to acknowledge that people need to be central to all our thinking, and how do we design for the future so that all the different requirements that people expect from the infrastructure system can be delivered in a way that meets not only their satisfaction, but ensures that they and their children can have a more prosperous life. I have always been of the view, in my many years as an infrastructure practitioner, and that's been confirmed here at SMART, that the idea of the way infrastructure systems, the water, the energy, the waste, the transportation and other systems interconnect has been well understood by the community, because that's the way the community navigates the infrastructure system every day. When they get up, they know that when they turn the tap on, the light switch on, they get into the car and so forth, that they've got pretty good certainty that all these systems are going to be available. And what a gift that is. And what we're concerned about is to say, well, can we continue to live up to the expectations of the community that all these things will work together on time, not only to get you to work, but ensure that the systems attract the right sort of investment so that your children can get a job, perhaps a job that doesn't even exist at the moment because the economy is changing, the technology is changing, and that the infrastructure needs to change with it as well, so that we can continue to be a great, advanced, industrialised society that we are today. So the community, I think, has always understood it because they do it day in and day out. I think business has always understood it. They do it day in and day out. But where we have failed, I think, is that policymakers and governments have struggled to think about it in a more holistic way, that they've always been in a silo, that it's a transport problem, it's a water problem, it's an electricity problem, and these things are interconnected. And we're hoping that there's a question that will hang over this symposium this year and going forward, that perhaps the way we organise government to solve our infrastructure problems is just fundamentally wrong. That when we look at the traffic jams that characterise Sydney or other major cities, it's not just a transport problem. It goes to the heart of broader society. Could it reflect the impact of retail shopping hours? Could it reflect the fact that our school hours are also coinciding with the peak hour? Could it also reflect the fact that we have an industrial relations systems where to work outside of the regular 9 to 5 period results in very onerous penalty rates? All these things come together as a system that results in the traffic jam. So you can see that if you think about traffic jams as just about more roads and a transportation problem, we would be fundamentally flawed in our thinking. And that's why we've come together today and this week is to say, let's raise our eyes and think about the system. I think it's a very important point that infrastructure is unique compared to almost anything else in our society because we build things that last for up to a century or more, particularly on roads and rail. But it's also true that the energy generations and electricity networks and water systems, these are 50 to 100 year type systems as well. So there's a great sense of awareness that the long term matters. And I guess what the community is saying is, how long can all the legacy systems, how long can all the stuff that's in the ground and above the ground continue to serve our needs? And when might it run out? When might its expiry date occur? And what do we do so that we don't have an abrupt disruption to the infrastructure services that we all require? So you're quite right that there is a sense of short-termism, and that short-termism can only be treated by one way, and that is to give the community more information about what's the quality and the state of the infrastructure and what are the scenarios that could best deliver a secure future. And that doesn't necessarily mean more infrastructure straight away. It can mean changing the way we interact with infrastructure, changing the demand for infrastructure, so that we don't have it busy for 2 hours a day during the peak hour, but then it's dormant for the rest of the day. And unfortunately, we do have many infrastructure systems, whether it's in power, whether it's in water, and certainly in transportation, where it's busy for only a part of the day or a part of the year, but for about 98% of its time, it sits idle. So there's something to think about there as to the way that we respond to the long term, not just with more infrastructure. Of course, there is more infrastructure needed in certain situations. We're a young country, but at the same time, we have been endowed with a lot of infrastructure that we can use in a far more intelligent way. And we really want to explore that grey rather than keeping it in the black and white, if I could put it to you. One of the most reassuring things about the Symposium is the way in which there has been a call to arms across both the policy community, the academic community and the business community. And the Smart Infrastructure Facility has really risen to that challenge of saying we cannot solve any of these problems in infrastructure without a collegiate coalition of the willing. And we've brought these people together from all over the world and here in Australia to actually start a very serious collaboration on working together. And the goodwill that's been expressed across the scholars and the experts has been extraordinarily warm and positive and forward-looking. And I think that we're actually on the cusp of creating a genuine new global movement to look at infrastructure and to ensure that governments and the community can be reassured that we haven't lost our touch for long-term planning. It's there, and we're going to ensure that it remains as good as it always has been.